It's been 1 year since I bought my Nintendo Switch, and I don't think I could have bought it at a better time, considering everything that's happened this year and what that's done to the Nintendo Switch prices, which are still trending upward, and it's still quite hard to find a true original Nintendo Switch, not a Switch Lite, in stores today, and because of that, the prices continue to be higher than you would anticipate. So when I bought mine, I actually did not get a dock, but I paid $200, and it turned out that the Joy-Cons drifted. I sent the guy that sold it to me on eBay a video of that, and he refunded me $60 so I could go buy another set of Joy-Cons. Of course, Joy-Cons were like $80, but I was willing to, reason with them. So relatively, I paid $140 for the system with no dock. Now, I actually bought new joysticks off eBay myself and repaired the Joy-Cons. At one point, I did send them into Nintendo to get them fixed, and they worked for like an hour. The Nintendo repair that everybody kind of raved about that they were doing for free. It's just a huge waste of time, in my opinion. They don't really do much to truly fix the problem. They just kind of band-aid over it, and it takes weeks for them to get there and back. So it wasn't worth it. So with that, extra $10 I spent on joysticks, spent $150 on the console, and then I was able to luckily pick up a dock on clearance at Target for like $14 like a few weeks later. So I paid like less than $165 for the whole thing. And then of course I bought it with the intention of modding it. And doing this and finding a compatible serial number is something that took time, and I had to kind of have an eagle eye for it on eBay. Of course, I could have bought one that, in the title of the post said, mod compatible or low serial number or something like that. But those obviously people wanted significantly more money for. So I actually bought one that the seller seemed unaware of the fact that it was a moddable console that had a low serial number. But they had just happened to post pictures of it, and I could see on the sticker on the bottom with that barcode that the serial number was a low one. And I rolled the dice that I was reading that blurry picture right. And it turned out that it worked out for me. And I got the system modded, got it running Atmosphere, which is one of like 2 or 3 different operating systems for the Switch that you can get on a modded one. Atmosphere looks very similar to the stock Switch, but of course it lets you run backup games as well as different homebrew applications, things like that. For the most part, what you're doing is you're installing NSP or running XCI files. Now, I will say when I initially bought this, my goal was to do a lot of different emulation on it. I'd owned a WiiU for probably 2 or 3 months. I'd kind of played around with that. Just had done a soft mod on it. I hadn't really done any of the, like an eShop type mod by using a DS game. So that one wasn't really very truly modded. It was like more of a temporary mod that I had on there. So I thought, this will be a system that I'll go all in on. I'll get, RetroArch on, a bunch of different cores, put a load of ROMs on it, to kind of use this as my main emulation system, with the goal being that ultimately I'd play up to the Dreamcast on it, because there was Dreamcast compatibility, though it wasn't very good, and unfortunately it turned out that that wasn't something I really wanted to play, because it just wasn't at a compatibility point where I could really enjoy playing the games. And of course, when it comes to emulation, there are plenty of older consoles that work, the GBA, the SNES, they run perfectly fine on a Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo 64 is kind of spotty and something that I still prefer to play on the original Xbox instead. And then of course you got like the PSP, which I think is emulatable on a lot of different things I own. So that wasn't really a draw for me. So in the end, I really actually didn't end up doing very much emulation over the past year on the Nintendo Switch, and rather I did a lot of that on the Wii U, particularly for the fact that on my Wii U, I could get the GameCube games to play it natively, I guess. Of course, it runs off of that virtual Wii that's built into the Wii U. And because it runs natively on the Wii, I guess it runs, I guess I would say natively on the GameCube. It runs smoothly and consistently, and it plays as it should, which is something I wouldn't be able to get on the Nintendo Switch, even if I use something like Laka, which is an Android-based operating system that has better emulation of the GameCube, but definitely still is not at the same level that the Wii U is at. So what I ended up doing was I ended up actually using the Wii U more for retro games than the Nintendo Switch, and I think that the Wii U does it better. I don't really take the Nintendo Switch anywhere. Like, I don't ever leave my home with it, so I'm either playing it like on my couch while I'm watching something else on the TV, or I'm just playing it on the TV. But the thing about the Wii U is, well, it does that too. It just can't leave the house. But since I never leave the house with the Switch, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the thing. And then ultimately, I ended up getting a new 2DS XL. And of course, that emulates basically everything we've talked about so far. Not really the PSP so much, but If I wanted to emulate PSP on the go, I would just play a PSP. So instead, what I ended up doing with my Switch was what I think a lot of people with modded Switches end up doing, and that's just simply playing retail Nintendo Switch games. Just the games that the Nintendo Switch is intended to play. There's really not that many homebrew games out there that will draw your attention. At least I don't personally think so. One in particular was Super Mario 64, which of course got ported to the Nintendo Switch, ran very well, and a lot of people at the time, their minds were just blown that this was running so well on the Nintendo Switch after it got ported from the PC version, but ultimately it got ported even down to the 3DS, so if it could be played on there, I wasn't going to go bother to play it on the Nintendo Switch either. And even as using the console just simply to play games that were made for the Nintendo Switch, playing it as I should, regardless of if it was a modded console or not, I think I've gotten a good amount of enjoyment out of this, especially for the price that I paid, having paid less than $200 for the console itself. Now, if I'd have paid, $400, $500 for it, because I paid an overinflated price these days, I don't know if it would have been worth it or if I'd have felt that way. But there were two games in particular that I played on over the last year that were just fantastic experiences, regardless of what people say. And in one, of course, is Fire Emblem Three Houses, which I've talked about on this channel. I think that's unanimously among most people who've played it considered a great game. But also, I really enjoyed Pokemon Sword, and I know that that's not a popular opinion, but it did get me to go back in the series and play Ultra Moon, a game that I had missed, as well as I actually finished Black for the first time after having started a save file years ago. So that game kind of got me back into Pokemon and playing some of the older titles that I had missed, because I did like that format, and I felt comfortable in that format, even if it's not quite the grand open world that we want Pokemon to be and that we think it can be on a home console. And I know that in a lot of ways Game Freak didn't live up to the hype, but I really did enjoy the game and did find it to be one of the better experiences that I had on the Nintendo Switch that I couldn't have anywhere else. Of course, there's other games that I've tried out on the system, as recently as Jump Force having a definitive edition out. Since I don't have Xbox Game Pass, I couldn't play it on there. So I was like, I'll try it on the Switch, because it had a different offline game mode, like a 3v3 that wasn't available on consoles, and I like it when they include offline game modes against the AI. So I wanted to try that out, and I did enjoy it, but of course it's an experience I could have had years ago on a newer system, and I saw that a lot recently, in September, as something like MX vs. ATV All Out got released on the Nintendo Switch. Well, it came out a couple of years ago on the other home consoles, so I don't like that a lot of things are getting ported to the Switch years later, or 6 months later. I think it just really kills the hype around those games if you've been able to play them somewhere else this entire time. But unfortunately, I guess that's what it takes to get the game optimized down to a level where it can be played on a Switch. So that's my opinions on owning a modded Nintendo Switch for the past year. I will say that it wasn't everything that I thought it would be. The emulation wasn't there. The homebrew community is quite toxic, and I did make an entire video on that. If you want to see, I'll have that link down in the description. But if you can get a Nintendo Switch for the proper price, I still think it's definitely worth owning one. Is it worth getting one that you can mod? All things considered, I don't really feel like it is. It's just a lot of a risk for what ended up being a very little reward that I ultimately got out of it. Unless you truly have nothing that you can play those older consoles or emulate them on. And if that's really your end game and that's what you want to do, I recommend picking up a WiiU instead. I know WiiU prices have went up recently, and they're not, $80 like they were when I bought mine. But I still think the Wii U is more worthwhile to check out if you're into playing older games, particularly because of the fact that it can play GameCube so well, and really everything all the way on down to, of course, the original Nintendo. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I'll see you in the next video.